the other day we were talking about a little bit about genetics, okay? And let me show you something that I picked up this week, okay? And it's all these muscle girls, and they're all women. A couple of them had problems because they were kicked out of soccer. They were accused of having too much testosterone. Okay, so these are the testosterone gals, you could say. And it's not that I chose black girls. It's just when you put sports, these are the girls you get. But they're white women, especially in wrestling and so on, kickboxing. So you'll find there's a mixture there. But yeah, the question is, are women more masculine like? Are men less masculine? You know, it's one of the issues going around today. Whatever your opinion is about that, whatever the statistics say about that. And I'm saying that that together with homosexuality, the fact that people have so many kids today that have autism and so on, I'm saying all that's traceable to one thing. And here's the graph that I guess synthesizes it all. Okay, for the last 100,000 years, we've been inbreeding. Okay, and at some point, I say that's got to produce problems. Part of the problem is we lose our genetic diversity, and because of that, you know, we start having these genetic problems. These genetic, you can call them diseases or you know, whatever we want to call them. Okay, so what's the issue? A fellow answers, he says, this theory is illogical because I said we've been inbreeding for ever since, you know, 200, 300,000 years. Huh?
You want me to read these?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
This theory is illogical.
That's what I'm saying by no. First, read the red one, which is what I say. No, so we
we've
put it in
been
the right context.
inbreeding ever since. We haven't had any input of new genes from monkeys or elephants or fruit flies.
Okay.
And the other person says, this theory is illogical. All species inbreed by this argument because different species cannot interbreed. That's got a point.
Yeah.
Without external genetic manipulation, genetic diversity increases with time as random mutations accumulate, and those which don't prevent the species from surviving will persist. Sources of declining genetic diversity arc. Extinction level events that create a genetic bottleneck and
Like a crash or something, yeah, of that sort.
and conflict between rival groups where one group massacres the other, which is documented throughout human history.
Yeah, so let me just synthesize what this fellow said because I think it's what a lot of people, maybe even the majority of people out there, including geneticists, believe, and that is that genetic diversity increases over time. I say it's exactly the opposite. A species can only lose genetic diversity throughout its history. When it finally loses most of its genetic diversity, that's approximately when it goes out in a background extinction. And this is a graph that I have in my book, the Neanderthal book, for those of you who are familiar with it. I'm saying that over time you can only lose genetic diversity because you have no other choice but to inbreed. Okay, in other words, you're marrying your own kind. And if you know what happens if brother and sister marry, especially through several generations, like in the case of the Amish, where they've been inbreeding for the last 350 years. They started out with a population of a few thousand, and today there are 350,000, like 1,000 times. Am I saying that right? Yeah, 100 times more, and several generations, 350 years later, and now they're having genetic problems. And I say that's what happens to the human race as a whole. But we've been inbreeding for a lot longer, 200, maybe 300,000 years since our species, you could say, began. And here we are, you know, with all the problems that we find today. That's my take on that. So, yeah, I disagree with this gentleman and also with most of the geneticists out there who believe that genetic diversity increases because you have all these variations accumulating. I'm saying it's not only because of these crashes that this fellow talked about, but the fact that we inbreed cannot help, you know, diversify our genes. That's my point. Okay. Okay. So one fellow says. Take it away.
I don't deny that mutational load and decreasing genetic diversity potentially plays some role. However, the onset of all of this correlated perfectly with a massive increase in toxic exposures in which we can induce
Yeah.
similar behaviors in animal models. On top of that, you have media, altered parenting styles, e.g. parentification, and emotional incest, whereby
I
the
guess
parent subtly or deliberately forces the child repetitively into something to serve and suit them, in many cases the role of the opposite sex, spousification. Single mothers, in particular, will often destroy their male children and try to prevent them from separating. Sprinkle in some misandry.
Okay, so essentially what this fellow is saying that this is, he said he gives a little credit to nature, but he says a lot of this has to do with nurture. In other words, with how we're educated
Is he
and the
talking about
environment,
this?
and maybe yeah, he's referring to the
The
same thing. The
weird,
fact that
yeah.
genetic diversity, the fact that the human race today has almost no genetic diversity. A lot of people are not aware of that. But yeah, we have almost no genetic diversity, and again, I'm saying that's because we've been inbreeding for so many thousands of years. Now, some of that you could say lately, especially that's where the confusion comes in. How much of that is related to food and environment? How much of that is due to education and the way we're, like in this fellow says, father and mother maybe don't give the proper, uh, you know, um, image of what a man should be, what a woman should be.
Isn't it then easier to look at other animals?
Yeah,
They don't have so much
social.
sophistication. It isn't as complex.
Right, right. Well, we do have at least two cases that I can talk to you about as far as that is concerned. One is the lions, one is the sheep. Okay, and if you look at the lions, there's very few of them in the world. We went to from about 150,000 that there were 50 years ago. Today, there's only 35,000, almost a fifth of the lions we had just 50 years ago. And what happens is, you can imagine a shrinking population, and what they end up doing is intermarrying within themselves. And add to that the fact that these lions, they were not made by God yesterday. They've been evolving for 6 million years at least. So they've already whittled all their genetic diversity. Now we have the last few who are intermarrying, inbreeding within themselves, within their groups. And, I think that has an effect at some point. That's one animal. The other one is the sheep. The sheep have been statistically shown to have almost 10% homosexuality within their populations. And so what you can draw from that is that, again, sheep are numerous, unlike the lions. They're numerous. We breed them on purpose. But, we kind of inbreed them on purpose also because we want the best sheep, the one that has the most wool and the bigger ones and whatever. And we do that with cows. We do that with, bulls and so on. We do that with horses, especially race horses. There's a lot of inbreeding, a lot of selective inbreeding, and we are the mother nature here. We're the ones doing the experiments. And I'm saying what we're doing is doing this favor to the animals, to those species, because what we're doing is we have all these sheep, and I think part of that process is that we're forcing them to inbreed, probably unknowingly. A lot of these animals are artificially inseminated. Okay, and that means that they pass the milk around, so that's not a good deal. But that's what we do, and that's what we have. So we do have homosexuality among lions, and we do have homosexuality among sheep. And the homosexual lobby takes it in one direction. I take it in another direction. I'm saying that that's got to do with inbreeding.
Okay, then let me spin that one last time. One last one.
Yeah.
What about if you take, assuming it is new, a new species such as an insect type? Are there homosexual insects?
Well, again, we would have to go through a full list. I think homosexuality, at least, is reserved mainly, as far as I know, for the mammals, maybe the birds, perhaps the fish. I don't know about insects. Insects, I haven't heard of one, but I wouldn't put it past.
But if they're the new species, then
Well, it's a good way of telling which one is a new species or not. One through genetic diversity. If a species, whatever species you want, insects, birds, whatever you want to look out there for, if you find that they have very little genetic diversity, I'm saying that's an old species. It's already whittled its genetics.
I guess what I'm asking is we'd have to find a case for a species that has a lot of genetic diversity but homosexuality to see if that can be a case, because then it would debunk.
Well, we have the case. We have one case at least, one experiment. It's not the only one. There's a couple more parallel to this. Okay, with different kinds of animals. This is one, the most famous, Calhoun's mice experiment. And what he did, he put a bunch of mice in I think it was 9 cubic meters or cubic feet of space. And he put 4 pairs of 4 couples, right? And at the beginning it was great because, it was Eden for the mice because they had all this space, they had all the food they wanted, no predators, no diseases. So they were isolated. They had all the food and water they wanted. So they were really in glory. They were in a perfect island. And what happened was they started to reproduce, and a few months later, they ended up with 2,000 plus mice, all descended from the same 4 pairs. And the issue here is that you could say, well, it's environmental because, there was a lot of overcrowding, as you can see there a little bit, okay? And what happened? The mice eventually, some of them became gay, okay? They had gay mice, so you could say he created homosexuality in the lab, okay? That's one issue. A lot of them became autistic. What John Calhoun, who was a psychologist, said, or the way he classified that, he says they stopped being mice.
Jeez.
In other words, they were no longer what you consider a mouse, one that goes out there and finds his things and knows what to do out there in the world. No, these were completely different kind of animals.
I guess they don't have to. I guess it's like the kids nowadays.
Yeah, yeah.
With
Well,
TikTok,
he said
they don't
that,
have to know how to survive, so they stop being human.
So it is. He said that was a microcosm of what's happened to humanity. A lot of psychologists objected to his findings, but the point here is that we cannot isolate genetics because in this case they all descended from the same grandfathers, the same
Well, no, we had
pioneers.
we had the theory of how to isolate genetics. If he made the enclosure ever bigger, proportional to however many rats there
That's
were,
our experiment.
then it would be a genetic.
Don't tell the people how to
Then
do
it would be strictly genetic because then there's no
Yeah.
volume cap.
Yeah, right. But then, the question is whether you're reproducing his experiment in the sense that his was specifically designed to test overcrowding, right? And in this case, you would open a valve and allow, the pressure to.
I mean, that'd be hard because at some point you have like billions of rats.
Yeah.
I mean, big fucking place.
Okay, so here we have another fellow who says, go ahead, read it.
I wonder if we could continue for longer than you think if we began introducing new genes through genetic viral technology. That sounds kind of cool. Not say this is good or bad, it just might be a possibility.
Yeah, the question is whether, so we inject, we have a vaccine, right? And we inject it in you and we say, okay, now you're a little different.
Maybe that's what the COVID vaccines were.
They change your genetic code in some way, okay? Let's just go with a thought experiment on that. Okay, so the question is, one of the two, we probably don't end up being human at some point because we got to change ourselves quite a bit in order to not be inbreeding and say, well, now we're not inbreeding because that guy is very similar to me, but he's not exactly like me because his genetic makeup is a little different. Okay, fine. That's the first issue. Is that a different species? The other issue is whether if you're not the same species, you might have the same problem that cats have. Big cats like lions and tigers, they can create ligers and tigons, but those animals normally, I think they only had one case where the guy could reproduce, but then again, I think that only went for one generation. That's where it stopped. In other words, they become infertile. Okay, and so we might create another human, but the question, or human-like, he's no longer like us, whatever comes out of there, right? Because his genetic code is different. But then, because they're different, maybe when they get together with one of us, who knows what comes out of that?
You're saying Mother Nature doesn't like cheating.
She doesn't like cheating. She
says, I built you to die after a certain time. Doesn't matter what you try to do.
You're scheduled to die. Please don't avoid it.
She put blocks everywhere.
It's like if I try to avoid my death. I'm 70 years old, and maybe I got 10 more years to go at most. So the issue is, can I avoid my death? Well, I doubt it very much. Really.
I mean, even if we put all those blocks, she's got the freaking sun clock that's gonna explode at some point. Like, even if you guys put all the blocks,
she put all these.
She doesn't play fair, does she?
You're not gonna beat her. Okay. Changing a little bit the subject. This is Biden. He says, looking back at 2022, I feel more confident about America than ever. What is he talking about? He says, my economic plan is making the United States a powerhouse for what? For innovation and especially manufacturing once again.
Isn't it already a powerhouse of innovation?
Well,
Manufacturing, maybe not.
in innovation, no problem. My problem is with this word manufacturing. Where is he coming with this thing? I mean, I thought the age of manufacturing was over, never to go back there again. Like we won't go back to agriculture, like we won't go to back to hunter gathering. I mean, if Biden tomorrow said, "Oh, we're going to be the #1 country in the world with hunter gatherers," I don't think so.
That'd be pretty badass, though.
Yeah.
When he said that, what?
Going back to hunter gathering, I don't think so. But that's more or less what he said when he says we're going back to manufacturing. So let me put it into proper context here, okay?
He said, let's go back to coal.
Yeah.
Let's
Well,
go back to wood.
Germany is doing
yeah.
a little bit of that. Germany has coal but no oil.
That's true.
Okay, so this is let me put it in the right context. Here it is. Okay, we have here 5 of the largest companies in Taiwan. And the largest, obviously, is TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor. And they're an international company, and they are the ones that sell chips to the world. They're big. They're one of the top sellers of chips, manufacturers and sellers of chips. And there you see some of the numbers that they have. And what's the issue? Among other things that they sell chips for the car industry. So they have a lot of demand for their product, okay? But what is the problem? It's in Taipei. It's in Taiwan. In fact, I used to work with TSMC as well when I worked at AMD, okay? We talked with their folk and it was normal, okay? Because we subcontracted to them. Okay, so what's the issue? Well, you have China, that one's Taiwan. Imagine if China tomorrow were to attack Taiwan, okay? And one of the two, conquer it and get a hold of TSMC or destroy it. Or maybe the Taiwanese destroy it before the Chinese get it, or something along those lines. Well, suddenly you have all this supply that disappears from the planet, okay? Or is controlled by the Chinese, together with the technology, meaning the machines and everything to manufacture them. That's a big step for China. You know, suddenly they would be like 8 years ahead from where they are now in the manufacturing of chips, which you could say, and we're not talking here about potato chips. These are real chips, you know. These are things that run the world. Okay, so imagine China gets a hold of that, and that's part of China now, and they control it from not Taipei, but from Beijing. Okay, so this is the issue. So what has Biden done, at least in his administration? Here's the first one that he did, and this is they passed the CHIPS Act. Okay, again, chips and not potato chips. Okay, and who's involved in this? Intel Corporation. And Intel's going to invest a few billion, and the government passed an act where they're going to subsidize, help Intel create chips here in the United States. And
there in the United States.
Yeah, and so you can see there what they say. Supporters, including companies like Intel, right, say the bill is necessary to compete with other countries that subsidize their semiconductor industry, referring specifically to China, right? But some who voted against, they said they viewed it as corporate welfare. I mean, does the government give you $1 billion when you start your business? Why would they give it to these guys? Well, because they're too big to fail, and they claim that they're competing against countries that subsidize their industries. Okay, but the issue is they're going to build this plant. They're building it already, by the way, in Ohio. Okay, and they're going to be manufacturing chips in the United States, just in case, for two reasons. There's a national security issue, which is if China gets a hold of Taiwan. That's one issue. And the other issue is, you know, just in case something happens over there, we want to be able to
supply ourselves.
Supply the market with the chips that the United States manufactures, aside from giving jobs to Americans, et cetera, et cetera. And the subsidy has to do a lot with the salaries, because the people in the United States would demand higher salaries than in Taiwan, and that's part of the problem. Okay, so that's why they need the subsidies. That's one issue. But the other one here, and this Biden went to visit, what was it, in November? He went to visit Arizona. Okay, and says Biden touts advanced chips manufacturing in visit to Arizona semiconductor plant. Turns out that not only the CHIPS Act allows for this, but this is a plant that's being made or founded by TSMC itself. And they're going to be building chips in Arizona as well, also giving jobs to people. And again, a question that's related to national security. The fact that, you know, that if someone takes over Taiwan, meaning the Chinese, that might create a problem for the chip distribution in the world. And here you have the United States saying, we're looking ahead that maybe in 1 or 2 years, China will attack Taiwan just in case we're going to have our chip plant somewhere else. Okay? And TSMC would be owner of one of them. They can always expropriate that from the Chinese if it's in Arizona, and the other one in Ohio. Okay, so they're creating jobs, they're creating manufacturing jobs. Will this overrule, flood out the service economy? My answer is no. Services will continue to grow at a faster pace than manufacturing. And if this is his idea that manufacturing is coming back, I'm saying that's only politics. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, they're creating manufacturing jobs, but it's not going to change the trend. The trend is in the direction of service.
Might give it a little,
I'm not saying.
little bump, and then it'll just go right back.
Yeah. I mean, how many industries the United States wants to have? It wants to bring back everything it had before China grew and took over a lot of the manufacturing because of its cheap labor. I don't think it can do that because a lot of countries out there will buy from China, not from the United States, because it will be the same product but cheaper.
Well, that's a good question. Maybe the U.S. should start thinking about cheaper labor.
Well, it can. That's market is run by the market. That's one issue. But the other issue is that the United States is doing this for national security issues, which doesn't concern any other country. It concerns the United States, but countries in Africa and in fact in Europe and South America, they're going to buy it wherever it's cheaper on the market. And if it's cheaper in China, made the same way, they won't care. That's, I think, the bottom line. Okay, and parallel to that, similar to that, related to that, we have the fact that the Senate passed a 1.7 trillion, that's trillion with a T, not billion with a B, okay, trillion spending bill, okay, so they authorized 1.7 trillion spending bill the other day. That's the Senate. It still has to go to the House of Representatives. But what's the issue? The issue is that we have inflation. That's one issue. And the
Once
other
you start
issue
using the
is
word trillion, yeah.
And the other one is, but that's not pocket change.
Yeah.
And then the other,
trillions, that's
and then
too many zeros.
The other one is debt. I mean, all that's debt that you're seeing there. So the government's incurring debt and creating money, and that's why we have inflation. And on top of that, you have now to cover a bigger budget. Okay? In other words, the budget keeps increasing year after year after year, and they can't stop it. And one of the problems there is that the same thing is happening to every country in the world right now. Every single country. There's not one you can select and say, that's not happening in my country. No way. It's happening in every country. And what's worse about that is that all those countries are pegged to the dollar. So if the dollar falls, these countries, their money falls even further. And that means that they have higher debt, higher unemployment than the United States. They're all clinging from the United States. And so here's the big empire, run from Rome. I'm sorry, not Rome. Was it Rome? No, it's called Washington, D.C. And everybody's clinging from there and clinging from the dollar. And so just, think about that, the fact that the macroeconomics doesn't look very good for the world, okay? We have inflation all around. And what we were saying a couple of weeks ago, that they're expecting a recession in 2023. So we're going to have a great year this year, 2023, okay? Think about that. Okay, final issue. Oh, no, I think it's not the one. It's, kind of like the final issue. Here we have Will Smith, okay? And fellow says, I remember having watched One Strange Rock, a documentary somewhere where Will Smith at some point defines life, more or less. He doesn't remember exactly. I couldn't find the exact definition. I looked at the video that he talked about, but I couldn't find the exact definition. But he says something like along the lines of this. He says, matter that reorganizes itself in a way such that it slows down the decreasing in entropy in the universe. That's the definition of life. Entropy, by the way, is amount of disorder. So it decreases the amount of disorder. So that's his definition of life, or that's the one that at least this fellow is proposing, or that's the one he thinks he heard. Okay, so first thing I do is tell you what I think.
I mean, off the bat, what I would say is just entropy defined as less disorder, or anything that we use the word disorder is an opinion. I could think something's disorderly.
That's the first one. True, that is true. But again, defining life as something that decreases disorder. I mean, what are we talking about? With the lions, they decrease disorder. We're talking about bacteria. They decrease.
Again, it's poetic.
Yeah, I don't know what that really means. encompasses too much.
I mean,
It's just
there's too
big.
much room for interpretation. Right?
Yeah.
That's what it is.
So what do? I define it in a different way, slightly different way, and here it is. Alive or living, a natural object. It's got to be natural, not something we made or that a beaver made, like a house or whatever, that moves against the path of least resistance. I used to say it moves against the gravity, but my son here corrected me, or as he always does, and no allowance for you this month. Okay. But essentially, it's something that moves against gravity. If you can move against gravity, it's because you're not a rock. Okay, that's essentially it. And we're not talking about you throwing the rock upwards. It's got to do it by itself, and it's got to be a natural object. Okay, and that's essentially what it's a definition that covers all life in the universe. I think it's broad. It's a perfect scientific definition, and I don't think you could have anything against it. I don't think you can find an exception. Okay. Essentially, a living being has the ability to move against gravity, and life is a group of living entities, living beings. Again, it's got to be a natural object. Okay, so, but I took issue with a couple other things that were mentioned in that video. Okay, here's the first one. You can go ahead and read it if you want.
Somewhere around 4 billion years ago, life emerged on Earth. The type of life that's there depends on what food is available. The first creatures on Earth were microbes. It's a law of nature that life evolves to fit its surroundings. It turns out that the big question for life is, what are we having for dinner? Food is energy. Everything living needs it.
Okay, that's what Will Smith said in that documentary, and so I'm saying, hold it. These people were talking because this was run by I think the History Channel, a big one of those TV shows that's important out there. I can't remember which one, but they say that life is that which must eat, etc., etc. They talk about food. You must eat. What are we having for dinner tonight? And when you say, look, the reason we're all going to die is because there's going to be no food, and people say, where did you come up with that? And here these people are telling you life is food, essentially. And he goes through this whole rigmarole where he says that plants receive their food from the sun. And he talks about food a lot. And it's like, what's extinction? The lack of food. And it's like, it never clicked in anybody's mind that it's lack of food. How did the dinosaurs die? Oh, it was an asteroid.
You're basically...
It's like out of nowhere. I mean, how about the food? You know, nobody thought about food.
It's kind of like life is food and death is not food.
Kind of like that. Okay, that's one issue. And here's the second issue. Okay, let me read that one.
In the future, when all human life is gone, bacteria will still be there. It doesn't matter what a planet is made of or how poisonous its atmosphere, simple microbes will work out a way to get it. Is there life out there somewhere? As we gaze up on those stars, there'll be nothing remotely like us looking back. During 3 billion years ago, life didn't even have a brain.
Okay, the question is, who was it who doesn't have a brain? I think we're talking about someone else here. Maybe it's the people who do these analysis. And I can only give you my 5 cents worth on that. I'm saying if there are aliens out there with human level intelligence, they look exactly like us, more or less. There's no green Martians out there. There are no silicon-based entities running around with intelligence out there. None of that. All that is Hollywood nonsense. Okay. And here, let me tell you why. I'll synthesize it. Okay. And we'll end with this. And here's a synthesis of what I'm talking about. Okay. And what we have here is specifications to create life necessary for life. The sun, the earth, for example, or any planet, we're talking about really any planet here, okay, can't be too far away from its star or too close to it, okay, because life would not be able to develop in such a system. We have maybe issues that are less important as distance from the sun, such as, you know, the magnetic field, the tilt of the planet, okay, whether it's on the ecliptic of that star, okay. The sun size, the planet size. I mean, is the planet too small? Even if it's at the right distance, maybe it's just a little pebble. I don't think that'll work. And if it's a giant one like Jupiter, well, maybe it won't work there either. How about the sun size or the star size, right? Maybe it's too big. Maybe it's too small. Will that have a bearing on whether life develops? And so on and so forth. Those are some of the things that I brainstormed as far as what the habitable zone is for life. And so those are the first constraints. Okay, so you have these constraints first on where that planet is located, how big it is, how far away it is, how cold or how hot it is, what kind of atmosphere it has. Does it have enough carbon to create life? And again, I'm not going to go into that, but no silicon life, no green life, and green humans, and I mean, plants, yeah, but not animals that are green. That's what I'm saying. Okay, and so you have a certain constraints first from the system, from the cosmic level. Then you have within the planet. How did intelligence develop? This guy says intelligence or a brain did not develop until I don't know much later. And I'm saying as soon as life developed, it had intelligence. Let me say that again. The first entity that had that moved against gravity, which is life, already had intelligence. It had a brain. It's called a central processing unit. Because the first one was a cell, and the cell has to have a compartmentalized system where each one is dedicated to some function. That's known as a brain. Okay, so life and brain are synonyms. Every living entity has a brain. Okay, in one way or another, because a cell has a brain. And until you define really what a brain is or intelligence, which no one has to this day, we can't even talk about those subjects. So that's where we should really start.